Welcome to Timekeepers for Sleep. If your thoughts feel like they're still in launch mode, if your brain keeps replaying the day as if it's a checklist that never ends, tonight you don't have to fight it. You can simply give your mind a long, quiet mission with nowhere urgent to go. This is a fascinating story for adults about a watch that really did go to space. The Moonwatch, the chronograph that sat on astronaut wrists as they orbited the Earth, traveled to the Moon and came safely home. No trivia quiz, no tech review, no pressure to remember dates. You don't have to be an engineer or a watch collector. You just have to be someone who wouldn't mind falling asleep to a real story told very slowly about people, time, and a small mechanical instrument quietly ticking in the middle of the most complex missions humans had ever flown. If this kind of story helps, you can always come back to Timekeepers for Sleep and build a little ritual for yourself. Press play, turn your screen face down, let the light go, and drift off while time is kept for you. For now, find a position that feels easy. Let your shoulders drop where they want to drop. Let your hands land where they naturally land. There is nothing important you need to hold. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out softly. Again in and out. Good. Tonight, we're going to step into a quiet spacecraft at midnight and into the long story of how a watch made for car racing ended up being certified by NASA for all manned space missions, flew with Gemini and Apollo crews, and even timed the crucial seconds that helped save Apollo 13. Well, move slowly like a capsule in orbit, one gentle scene at a time. You don't have to stay awake for the whole journey. If you fall asleep halfway through, the Moonwatch will be doing exactly what it was built to do: keep time while someone rests. Imagine you're inside a small spacecraft. The cabin lights are dimmed. Most switches are quiet now, tiny rectangles of light against panels of gray. The view through the window is almost unreal, a curve of blue and white Earth against the black of space, slowly rotating as the craft orbits. Inside, 3 astronauts float in their couches and harnesses. Somewhere behind them, machine systems keep humming. Pumps, fans, regulated flows of air and power. They've finished another long checklist. They've checked oxygen, fuel, communications, navigation. One of them reaches down to his wrist and taps the crystal of a black-dialed chronograph. The watch looks ordinary: steel case, 3 subdials, a tachymeter scale around the bezel. On Earth, you might see something like it on the wrist of a driver or an engineer or a collector who likes old tool watches. But here, in this cramped, weightless space, it has a special role. To NASA, this watch is flight qualified for all manned space missions, a mechanical backup in case electronics fail. To the astronauts, it's a familiar companion, a personal instrument that can be trusted to mark out minutes and seconds when every second counts. It is the Omega Speedmaster, the watch that would come to be called the Moonwatch. Picture it there on the wrist, strapped over the sleeve of a pressure suit with a long Velcro band. The dial is matte black so it doesn't reflect too much light. White hour markers stand clearly against the dark, Three smaller dials nested within the main dial, one for running seconds at 9 o'clock, one for elapsed minutes at 3 o'clock, one for elapsed hours at 6 o'clock. Around the outer edge, a tachymeter scale, numbers printed on a black bezel that once helped racing drivers convert lap times into speed. In space, that scale is less useful. But the chronograph function, the ability to start, stop, and reset a timer with pushers on the side of the case, that becomes essential. Engine burns must be timed precisely. Too short and the spacecraft doesn't reach the right velocity. Too long and it overshoots the target. Spacewalks must be timed to conserve oxygen. Experiments must be timed to match mission schedules. Maneuvers must be synchronized with ground control. And if the electronic timers fail, if power is lost, if systems go dark, this mechanical watch, powered by a hand-wound spring, becomes the only reliable timekeeper aboard. For you tonight, this scene is just a starting point. You don't have to imagine yourself in the spacecraft. You can simply borrow the image of calm competence. Astronauts trained so thoroughly that even in the most extreme environment, they can check a watch, make a note, and continue their work. Your work tonight is simpler. Rest. Let the story continue in the background. Long before it ever saw a rocket, the Speedmaster was born for a different kind of speed. In 1957, Omega Watch Company in Switzerland designed it as a chronograph for timing laps on racing circuits. The 1950s were the golden age of motorsports, Formula One, rally racing, endurance events like Le Mans. Drivers and pit crews needed precise timing instruments. The Speedmaster was part of Omega's professional line of tool watches, alongside the Seamaster for divers and the Railmaster for engineers working near magnetic fields. It had a bold black dial with high-contrast white markers and a tachymeter scale printed not on the dial but on the bezel, a helpful ring around the glass that allowed drivers and timers to read speed at a glance. Here's how the tachymeter worked. If you started the chronograph when a car passed a marker and stopped it when the car passed the next marker 1 kilometer later, the chronograph hand would point to a number on the bezel showing the car's average speed. Simple, practical, elegant. Pushers on the side of the case started, stopped, and reset the chronograph hand, the long, thin seconds hand that swept around the dial separate from the watch's main time. It was a tool for people working with fractions of minutes. Nobody in that design room was thinking yet about lunar modules or re-entry angles. They were thinking about lap times, rally stages, and the growing culture of motorsports. But the qualities that made the Speedmaster good for racing, robust construction, legible dial, reliable movement, would also make it quietly perfect for an environment no one at the time had ever visited. The first Speedmaster reference was the CK2915. It had a steel case, a black dial, and straight lugs, the metal bars that hold the strap or bracelet. Inside was the caliber 321 movement, a hand-wound chronograph mechanism based on a design from Lemania, a Swiss movement maker known for making robust, accurate calibers. Hand-wound meant the wearer had to turn the crown each day to wind the mainspring, storing energy for the next 40 to 48 hours of running. There was no automatic rotor, no self-winding mechanism. This would later prove to be an advantage in space, where the lack of gravity and the limited wrist movement in a bulky suit meant automatic watches might not wind properly. For several years, the Speedmaster lived a quiet life. It appeared in Omega's catalogs. It was sold in watch shops. Some racing enthusiasts bought it. Some collectors noticed it. And then, in the early 1960s, astronauts began buying them privately. Walter Schirra, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, bought a Speedmaster from a retail store in Houston. He wore it during his Mercury Atlas 8 mission in 1962, the first Speedmaster in space, though it wasn't officially approved yet. Other astronauts noticed. Virgil Gus Grissom bought one. Gordon Cooper bought one. These were test pilots, men comfortable with instruments and precision. They appreciated the Speedmaster's clear dial, its chronograph function, its solid build. But NASA's engineers noticed something else. If astronauts were going to wear personal watches on missions, those watches needed to be tested and certified to make sure they wouldn't fail in the extreme conditions of spaceflight. And so began one of the most famous testing programs in watch history. Skip forward to the early 1960s. NASA is preparing for the Gemini and Apollo programs, missions that will move from short orbital flights to docking, spacewalks, and eventually journeys to the moon. Engineers are thinking about rockets, life support, heat shields, computers. In the middle of all this, a practical question appears. What should the astronauts wear on their wrists? Spacecraft have clocks, of course. Panels, timers, mission elapsed time displays. But astronauts need to move, to look away from the panel, to perform tasks inside and outside the vehicle. They need a personal timekeeper that is not tied to any single system. If electricity fails, if displays go dark, if they are outside on a spacewalk, they still need a way to time burns, maneuvers, and checklists. NASA's engineers could have designed something special from scratch. Instead, they chose a simpler idea: find the toughest, most reliable chronographs already made on Earth, and see if any of them can survive what space will do to them. The task fell to James Reagan, a test engineer at NASA's Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. In October 1964, Reagan sent letters to 10 watch companies requesting chronograph wristwatches for consideration. The companies included Omega, Rolex, Longines, Wittnauer, Breitling, Bulova, Hamilton, Mito, Gruen, Benrus, and others. The letter specified requirements. The watch must be a wristwatch with a chronograph function. It must be hand-wound, not automatic. It must be commercially available, no custom builds. Only 4 companies responded with watches. Hamilton submitted a pocket watch and was immediately disqualified. The requirement clearly stated a wristwatch. That left 3 competitors: a Rolex chronograph, the reference 6238, which some call the pre-Daytona, a Longines Wittnauer chronograph, reference 235T, and an Omega Speedmaster, reference 105.003. James Reagan purchased these watches through normal retail channels, like any customer could. No special treatment. No advance warning to the manufacturers. He brought them into NASA's testing lab in Houston, and the real examination began. The tests were not gentle. They were designed to simulate the harshest conditions a watch might encounter during spaceflight, and then push even further to see where failure would occur. There were 11 tests in total. Each watch had to pass all 11. Let's walk through them slowly one by one. Test 1: High temperature. The watches were placed in an oven at 160 degrees Fahrenheit, 71 degrees Celsius, for 48 hours. Then the temperature was raised to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 93 degrees Celsius, for 30 minutes. What? Spacecraft in direct sunlight can become extremely hot. Materials expand. Lubricants thin. Springs lose tension. A watch that works at room temperature might stop working when baked. Test 2: Low temperature. The watches were chilled to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 18 degrees Celsius, for 4 hours. In the shadow of space or on the dark side of the moon, temperatures plunge. Lubricants thicken. Materials contract. Metal becomes brittle. Test 3: Temperature cycling in near vacuum. This was brutal. The watches were placed in a vacuum chamber at 1/1,000,000th of normal atmospheric pressure, simulating the airless environment of space. Then they were heated to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes, then cooled to 0 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. This cycle repeated 15 times. What? A spacecraft orbits between sunlight and shadow every 90 minutes. Materials expand and contract repeatedly. Crystals crack. Cases warp. Seals fail. Test 4: Relative humidity. The watches were exposed to 95% humidity at temperatures ranging from 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 240 hours, 10 days. Spacecraft cabins can become humid from astronaut perspiration and breathing. Moisture can corrode metal, fog crystals, damage movements. Test 5: Oxygen atmosphere. The watches were placed in a pure oxygen environment at 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 48 hours. Early spacecraft used pure oxygen atmospheres at reduced pressure. In such environments, materials that are normally safe can become flammable or release toxic gases. Test 6: Shock and impact. Each watch received 6 separate impacts of 40 G, 40 times the force of gravity, from different directions. Imagine dropping a watch from a height onto concrete, but in 6 different orientations. Jewels can crack. Hands can bend. Movements can be knocked out of alignment. Test 7: Acceleration. The watches were placed in a centrifuge that ramped from 1 G to 7.25 G over about 5 minutes, simulating the acceleration of launch. Then, in some tests, they were subjected to 16 G for short bursts. Test 8: Decompression. The watches were placed in a vacuum chamber at 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 90 minutes, then 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, all at 1/1,000,000th of normal pressure. Trapped air inside a watch case can expand explosively in vacuum. Crystals can pop off. Dials can buckle. Test 9: High pressure. After vacuum, the opposite. The watches were pressurized to 1.6 atmospheres, 23.5 pounds per square inch, for 1 hour. Spacecraft cabins are pressurized. A watch that survived vacuum might still fail under pressure if seals were damaged. Test 10. Vibration. The watches were strapped to a vibrating platform that cycled from 5 to 2,000 cycles per second and back, 3 times for 30 minutes each, with an average impulse of 8.8 G. Rocket engines create intense vibration. Screws can loosen. Parts can rattle. Springs can fatigue. Test 11. Acoustic noise. The watches were blasted with 130 decibels of sound across frequencies from 40 to 10,000 Hz for 30 minutes. 130 decibels is louder than a jet engine at close range. Sound creates pressure waves that can damage delicate mechanisms. These tests weren't performed once. They were repeated multiple times to ensure consistency. And the results had to meet strict timing standards. After all tests, the watches could not gain or lose more than a certain amount of time per day. For you, lying in bed, you don't have to remember the numbers or the sequence. The important part is this: NASA wasn't looking for a watch that could survive one extreme condition. They were looking for a watch that could survive all of them, one after another, and still tell accurate time. The torture tests began. The Rolex chronograph went into the chamber first. During the relative humidity test, it stopped running twice. During the high temperature test, the chronograph seconds hand warped from the heat and began binding against the other hands on the dial. The watch failed. The Longines went next. During the high temperature test, the crystal warped and disengaged from the case. The second watch was tested. During the decompression test, the same thing happened. The crystal warped and popped off. In the vacuum of space, a watch without a crystal would be useless. The Longines failed. That left the Omega Speedmaster alone. It went through all 11 tests. It did not emerge unscathed. During the decompression test, it gained 21 minutes, meaning its timekeeping was significantly affected by the extreme heat and vacuum. During the acceleration test, it lost 15 minutes. The luminous material on the dial, radium-based paint that glowed in the dark, was destroyed by the heat and vacuum. But the watch kept running. The hands still moved. The chronograph still started, stopped, and reset. The case remained intact. The crystal stayed attached. After all tests were completed, NASA's engineers examined the Speedmaster. They wound it. They set the time. They ran it for several days. Its timekeeping, after recovering from the extreme tests, fell back within acceptable limits. On March 1, 1965, James Reagan issued a memo. The Omega Speedmaster Professional Reference 105.003 was officially flight qualified for all manned space missions. Furthermore, it was the only watch qualified for EVA, extravehicular activity, meaning spacewalks outside the spacecraft. The racing chronograph had become an astronaut's tool. NASA suggested a few modifications, adding a 24-hour rotating bezel and luminous markings to the elapsed time subdials for better visibility. Omega made these changes in subsequent versions, but the fundamental design, the black dial, the 3 subdials, the tachymeter bezel, the hand wound movement, remained the same. In your mind, you can picture James Reagan in a small testing lab, clipboard in hand, watching the Speedmaster tick away after being heated, frozen, shaken, and blasted with sound. He probably didn't know that this watch would become one of the most famous timepieces in history. He was just doing his job, finding equipment that wouldn't let astronauts down. For you tonight, this part of the story is about persistence through testing. Most things fail when pushed to extremes. If you keep going. Your body has also been through tests today: stress, decisions, physical demands, mental work. Tonight, you don't have to prove anything. You've already done your test. You can rest now. Before the moon missions, there were the Gemini flights, pairs of astronauts testing rendezvous, spacewalks, and long-duration orbits. Gemini was the middle step between Mercury's short solo flights and Apollo's lunar missions. On March 23, 1965, Gus Grissom and John Young flew Gemini 3, the first manned Gemini mission. They wore the first officially qualified Speedmasters into space. In photos from the time, you can see the watches strapped over the suits with long Velcro bands. On June 3, 1965, came Gemini 4, Ed White and James McDivitt. During this mission, Ed White performed the first American spacewalk, or as NASA officially called it, extravehicular activity, EVA. Picture him floating outside the spacecraft, tethered by a long umbilical cord carrying oxygen and communications. On his left wrist, over the thick white fabric of his pressure suit, a Speedmaster reference 105.003, the Ed White model. The watch was attached with a long nylon strap secured with Velcro, wrapping multiple times around the bulky suit sleeve. White used a handheld maneuvering unit, a small device that shot jets of compressed gas, to move away from the spacecraft and then back. He spent 23 minutes outside. During that time, the Speedmaster was exposed to direct sunlight, intense cold and shadow, vacuum, and radiation. It kept running. When White reluctantly re-entered the spacecraft, he didn't want the spacewalk to end. The watch was still ticking. For you tonight, you don't need to float in space. But you can imagine the feeling of being outside, tethered but free, moving in slow motion with Earth filling half the sky. And you can imagine glancing at your wrist, seeing the familiar black dial, and knowing exactly how much time has passed and how much oxygen remains. Inside the capsule, astronauts used their Speedmasters for timing engine burns. A flight controller would call up from Houston, "Mark in 10 seconds, mark." The astronaut would press the chronograph pusher. The long hand would start sweeping. When it reached the planned duration, maybe 7 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, they would shut down the engine. These small adjustments changed the spacecraft's trajectory, allowing it to rendezvous with another vehicle, adjust its orbit, or set up for re-entry. Every second mattered. Too short and you'd have to burn again, wasting precious fuel. Too long and you might overshoot your target by miles. For all of this, the astronauts trusted a mechanical watch powered by a wound spring. Throughout the Gemini program, 10 manned missions between 1965 and 1966, Speedmasters flew on every flight. They timed experiments. They backed up electronic timers. They kept personal time when astronauts needed to know how long they'd been awake or how long until the next scheduled task. The watch became part of the routine, as essential as checklists, helmets, and gloves. From Earth's perspective, Gemini tested docking, navigation, and spacewalking. For the watch, Gemini was a proving ground, a rehearsal for longer, more complex missions to come. The Moon was now on the schedule. When Apollo flights began, Speedmasters were standard issue. Each astronaut received a watch with a specific reference number, logged, serial tracked, and recorded. By the time of Apollo 11, the first landing mission in July 1969, the reference most associated with lunar history was the Speedmaster Professional 105.012. This version had an asymmetrical case that protected the crown and pushers from accidental impacts, a black dial, and the familiar 3-register layout. On that mission, each of the 3 astronauts had his own watch. Neil Armstrong, the mission commander; Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot; Michael Collins, who would remain in orbit in the command module Columbia while the other 2 descended to the surface. Collins wore a Speedmaster reference 145.012, a closely related model. The 2 astronauts who would step onto the Moon, Armstrong and Aldrin, had 105.012 Speedmasters issued to them. On July 20, 1969, the lunar module Eagle separated from Columbia and descended toward the Sea of Tranquility. Inside the cramped cabin, Armstrong and Aldrin stood at the controls, watching the descent. When they landed, the Eagle has landed, both watches were still running. After several hours of preparation and systems checks, they depressurized the lunar module and opened the hatch. Armstrong descended the ladder first. His Speedmaster remained inside the lunar module, attached to the instrument panel as a backup timer. Buzz Aldrin followed. On his wrist, over the thick sleeve of his EVA suit, was his Speedmaster 105.012. In the famous photographs from the lunar surface, you can see the watch, case enlarged by its long strap, circling the puffy white fabric of the glove area. Buzz Aldrin's Speedmaster became the first watch worn on the Moon. Not because it was the most expensive or the most complicated. Not because it was made of precious metals or covered in jewels. But because it was reliable, legible, and had survived NASA's tests. The watch was not the focus of the mission, and that's fitting. It was there to perform a quiet duty, timing activities on the surface, keeping track of how long life support systems had been working, serving as a backup to instruments on the suit and in the module. Armstrong and Aldrin spent about 2.5 hours outside. They collected samples. They deployed experiments. They took photographs. They hopped in 1/6 gravity. And on Aldrin's wrist, the Speedmaster kept ticking, measuring seconds in a place where no watch had ever been worn before. When they returned to the lunar module, ascended to orbit, docked with Columbia, and began the journey home, the watch came with them. After the mission, Aldrin's watch was supposed to be donated to the Smithsonian Institution. But somewhere between then and now, it disappeared. It was lost or stolen during transit. To this day, its location is unknown. Armstrong's watch, the one that stayed in the lunar module, is in the Smithsonian. For you tonight, this scene is not about the drama of the landing or the historic speeches. It's about a tool doing its job in an extraordinary place. You don't have to go to the moon tonight. You can just rest. The Speedmaster kept time on the lunar surface. Tonight, your only job is to let time pass while you sleep. Leave the surface for a moment and imagine being inside the lunar module, the fragile, spidery lander that carried 2 astronauts from lunar orbit down to the ground and back again. The interior is small and cluttered. Panels covered in switches, gauges, and labels. 2 triangular windows. Thin walls. In the moments before ignition for ascent back to orbit, the cabin is full of concentration. The engine that will lift them from the moon has never been test-fired with humans on board before. There is no backup lander. If it does not light, they stay. On checklists, times are marked. How long the burn must last. How long systems have been on. On one wrist, a Speedmaster is ready. When the engine ignites, the astronaut presses the pusher. The chronograph hand moves, ticking off seconds as the tiny spacecraft rises from the surface, leaving behind dust, footprints, and experiments. To us now, far away in time and distance, those seconds have long passed. To the watch, they were simply one more interval to measure. Throughout the Apollo program, 6 successful lunar landings between 1969 and 1972, Speedmasters flew on every mission. Apollo 12, Pete Conrad and Alan Bean walked on the moon wearing Speedmasters. Apollo 14, Alan Shepard, the first American in space, now the oldest man to walk on the moon, wore a Speedmaster while hitting golf balls in 1/6 gravity. Apollo 15, Commander Dave Scott's Speedmaster lost its crystal during a spacewalk on the lunar surface. For the final EVA, he wore a backup Bulova chronograph, but that's another story. Apollo 16 and Apollo 17, more Speedmasters on the moon. By the end of the program, the connection between the Speedmaster and lunar exploration was inseparable. Omega began marketing it as the Moonwatch, a nickname that stuck and is still used today. But the watch's most famous moment wasn't on the moon. It was during a mission that never made it there. Not every mission goes according to plan. On April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 launched from Kennedy Space Center. The crew, Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. The mission plan: land in the Fra Mauro Highlands on the Moon, conduct experiments, return home. On April 13th, about 56 hours into the mission, 200,000 miles from Earth, an oxygen tank in the service module exploded. The explosion was catastrophic. It damaged the power system, vented oxygen into space, and crippled the command module's ability to sustain life. Lovell radioed Houston with the now famous words, "Houston, we've had a problem." The mission to the moon was over. The new mission: get the crew home alive. With the command module damaged, the crew moved into the lunar module, the small two-man lander that was supposed to take them to the moon's surface. It became a lifeboat. To conserve power, NASA instructed the crew to shut down nearly all electrical systems in both the command module and the lunar module. Cabin temperatures dropped to near freezing. Water condensed on the walls. Carbon dioxide levels rose until jury-rigged filters brought them down. And the digital timers, the electronic clocks and mission elapsed time displays, were unreliable or turned off to save power. To bring the damaged spacecraft back onto a safe re-entry path, the crew had to perform a critical course correction burn using the lunar module's descent engine. Mission Control calculated the burn: 14 seconds. No more, no less. Too short, and the spacecraft would miss Earth's atmosphere entirely, drifting into space. Too long, and it would hit the atmosphere at the wrong angle, either burning up or bouncing off back into space. With the digital timers unreliable, Jack Swigert would time the burn manually. On his wrist, an Omega Speedmaster. Picture the scene inside the lunar module. 3 exhausted, cold men. Panels of switches lit by minimal power. The Earth visible through one window, growing larger now as they approach. Lovell is at the controls, using Earth's horizon visible through the window to steer the spacecraft. There's no computerized guidance. He's flying by eye. Swigert's finger is on the chronograph pusher of his Speedmaster. From Houston the call: stand by for the burn, mark. Swigert presses the pusher. The central chronograph hand jumps into motion. The engine ignites. Outside, invisible in the vacuum, the rocket nozzle fires, pushing against the combined mass of the command module, service module, and lunar module. Swigert watches the dial. The chronograph hand sweeps through the seconds. 1, 3. You can count along slowly now if you like. 4, 5, 6. 7, 9. 10, 11, 12. 13, 14. Shut down, Swigert says. The engine cuts off. The burn is complete. The watch does not know that it has just played a role in a rescue. It only knows that the heart of its movement has ticked 14 seconds worth of beats. But that was enough. The new trajectory brought Apollo 13 safely back to Earth. On April 17, 1970, the command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. All 3 crew members survived. Afterward, NASA acknowledged the watch's role. On October 5, 1970, Omega received NASA's Silver Snoopy Award, the highest honor NASA gives for contributions to flight safety and mission success. The award is named after Snoopy, the Beagle character from the Peanuts comic strip, who NASA used as a mascot for safety programs. To this day, Omega commemorates the Apollo 13 mission with special edition Speedmasters featuring Snoopy on the dial or caseback. For you tonight, lying in bed, Apollo 13 can be a reminder. Sometimes a small, simple instrument quietly doing its job can make all the difference in a complex situation. You do not always have to be the entire spacecraft, the entire mission, the entire plan. Sometimes, it is enough to be one steady thing. Tonight, you don't even have to be that. You are allowed to rest. Let's step away from rockets and look closely at the watch itself. Picture it lying on a dark cloth in low light. The case is brushed and polished steel about 42 millimeters across, the diameter of a quarter. The lugs, the metal bars that hold the strap, curve gently downward. On later models like the 105.012, they have an asymmetrical shape, with extra metal protecting the crown and pushers from side impacts. On the right side of the case you see 3 controls. A crown in the middle to wind and set the time. A pusher above the crown to start and stop the chronograph. A pusher below to reset it. Around the dial runs the tachymeter bezel, black with white numbers, measuring units per hour based on elapsed seconds. The dial itself is matte black, so it doesn't reflect too much light. White hour markers stand clearly against the dark, with small rectangles of luminous material to glow in low light. On vintage models, this lume has aged from white to cream or even brown, giving the watch a warm, vintage look. 3 subdials sit at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock. At 9, running seconds. This is the watch's normal seconds hand, constantly moving. At 3, chronograph minutes, counting up to 30 minutes of elapsed time when the chronograph is running. At 6, chronograph hours, counting up to 12 hours. The hands are strong and straight, white, loomed, easy to see in cockpit lighting. The chronograph seconds hand is long and thin, sweeping around the entire dial. Flip the watch over and you find a solid caseback, no transparent window. On many Speedmasters there is an engraving, the first watch worn on the moon or flight qualified by NASA for all manned space missions. Sometimes there's a seahorse emblem, Omega's logo, and technical specifications. Inside, hidden from view, is the movement. On the earliest models, it was the caliber 321, a hand-wound chronograph mechanism with a column wheel, known for its smooth pushers and reliable operation. Later models used the caliber 861 and its successors, the 1861 and 3861, slightly simplified but still robust and accurate. Hand wound means the wearer must turn the crown each day, winding the mainspring, a long, coiled strip of steel that stores energy like a compressed spring. For NASA, the hand wound design was an advantage. It required no rotor, no extra parts that might fail, and it worked equally well in zero gravity. The movement ticks at 21,600 vibrations per hour, 6 ticks per second. If you hold a Speedmaster to your ear, you'll hear a gentle, rapid ticking, not the slow tick-tock of an old clock, but a quick, mechanical heartbeat. For you, lying in bed, you don't have to wind anything. You can just imagine the sensation of gently turning the crown, click, 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 feeling a mainspring tighten, storing up little packets of energy for future seconds. Each of those seconds is a place where something could happen. But tonight, most of them will simply be used for sleep. Decades after the Apollo missions, the Speedmaster is still in production. Modern versions have updated movements, revised bracelets, and sometimes display casebacks showing the movement through a transparent window. But they carry the same overall shape and dial layout as their ancestors. In the collecting world, older references like the 105.003 Ed White and the 105.012 Apollo 11 are now sought after, not because they are shiny and new, but because they show the gentle marks of time and use. On some dials, the luminous material has aged from bright white to a creamy, warm tone called tropical by collectors. On some bezels, the black insert has faded to gray or even brown. Cases have hairline scratches, polished edges, softened lugs. Every mark is a small story. A desk edge here, a doorknob there, a moment catching a jacket zipper. In some collections, these watches are kept carefully in boxes, worn now and then for special occasions. In others, they are daily companions, still riding buses, still sitting in meetings, still timing ordinary things like coffee brewing and parking meters. The moon is far away, but the watch is still on wrist. In your story tonight, you can decide where your imaginary moonwatch lives. On the wrist of an astronaut strapped into a couch for launch? On the arm of an engineer at mission control, checking the length of a burn while numbers cascade on screens? Or in a quiet room decades later, in the hands of a student, a teacher, a historian, turning it over and reading the engraving on the back? Perhaps it's in a small museum gallery. The theme of the room is time and space. In one glass case on a soft stand sits a worn Speedmaster, a moonwatch with a faded bezel and a dial that glows softly under the lights. On the wall behind it, photos, an astronaut on the lunar surface, a control room full of consoles, a black and white image of 3 men in bulky suits walking toward a rocket. The label next to the watch explains that it was worn on training missions, or perhaps on an actual spaceflight. Visitors move slowly past. Some barely glance. Others stop and lean in, their reflections mixing with the watches. A child presses their face closer to the glass, fascinated by the idea that this small object left the planet. The watch does nothing. It has earned the right to rest. It might still run if wound. It might not. Either way, its work is done. For you, this scene can be a gentle reminder. There will be seasons in your life when you are in intense use. Timing burns, metaphorically speaking, helping steer big projects, making critical calls. And there will be seasons when you are more like a museum piece, still meaningful but not required to act. Sleep is a small version of that second state. For some hours, you don't have to perform. You are allowed to be still. Bring your attention back to your own body. You are not in mission control. You are not in a capsule. But you are, in a way, your own little spacecraft. You have systems running all the time: breathing, circulation, digestion, temperature regulation. Most of the day, you supervise many things consciously: tasks, conversations, problems. At night, you are allowed to hand more of that back to automatic mode. Imagine your body as a capsule in orbit on the night side of Earth. Most of the lights on the panel are dimmed. Essential systems keep running. Non-critical experiments are paused. You, the conscious commander, can lean back in the couch, look out the window at the curve of the planet, and decide that for the next stretch of time you will do nothing active. Your internal moonwatch can keep ticking. Your heart can keep beating. Your lungs can keep moving air in and out. You don't have to supervise each tick or each breath. If a thought pops up trying to drag you back to a problem, I should have done this, I must remember that, you can imagine gently pressing the pusher to stop that particular chronograph, letting its hand fall back to zero. Not now. Later. Right now, your mission is simply to drift. Let's slowly scan through your body, letting each part feel a little more like it's floating in gentle zero gravity. Start with your feet. Notice your toes. If they're curled, let them uncurl. Feel your heels resting on the surface beneath you. Move up to your calves. Imagine the muscles warming slightly, then releasing, as if a suit that had been pressurized now gently relaxes. Your knees, there are no stairs to climb right now. Your thighs and hips, they've carried you from place to place all day. For this stretch of time, they are passengers. Your lower back, let it be supported by whatever you're lying on. If there is any tension, see if you can let gravity have a little more of it. Your stomach and chest. No meetings, no presentations, no rockets to launch. Just the rise and fall of breath. Your shoulders, if they feel like they've been wearing an invisible backpack, see if that can slide off to one side onto the floor where it can wait until morning. Your arms, down to your hands and fingers, tools you've used for typing, carrying, scrolling, washing, cooking. They can rest now. Imagine your hands as gloves placed carefully on the console between shifts. Your neck, let your head be heavy on the pillow. Your jaw, you can let it unclench. Your tongue can rest against the floor of your mouth or anywhere that feels easy. Your eyes, if they are still open, let them close or half close. There is nothing you need to watch. Somewhere in your imagination, the Moonwatch's hand is still circling, but you don't have to see it. Time can move without supervision. We followed this watch from racetracks on Earth to brutal test chambers at NASA, to cramped Gemini capsules, to the moon's surface, to the tense minutes of Apollo 13, to collectors' wrists, to museum cases. Through all of it, its job has been the same: measure intervals dependably so that humans can make better decisions. Tonight, no mission depends on you knowing the exact time. You do not need to time a 14-second burn. You do not need to count down to ignition. You do not need to synchronize with anyone. Your only job is to give your body and mind what they need to recover. If you are still awake enough to hear these words, notice whether your breathing is a little slower than it was at the start. Notice whether your limbs feel heavier, as if lunar gravity has settled them gently into the mattress. If stray thoughts continue to orbit, that's fine. You can let them be like distant satellites circling without consequence. The core of you can drift inward toward the dark, quiet side where sleep lives. The Moonwatch in our story will keep counting seconds for as long as its mainspring holds. You do not have to. You can let go of the need to track, to plan, to remember. Everything that needs doing can wait for a different orbit. For now, you are just a passenger on a long, soft trajectory through the night. If you wake later and realize you never heard how this story ended, that will mean you used it well. For this mission, there is no debriefing, no report to file, no scorecard. Just rest. The watch can keep the time. You can sleep now. Good night.